Hey everybody, so I want to talk about two teams who are on the playoff bubble, one in the East and one in the West right now, because if I were a fan of either of these teams, I would be very, very worried right now. Very worried about their team's chances of making the playoffs. And we'll start in the East with the team that is the Montreal Canadiens. The Montreal Canadiens had a huge game last night against the Columbus Blue Jackets, and they got blasted. 6-2 Columbus won. And this is worst case scenario for Montreal fans because they've played 78 games. Columbus has played only 77, and they're now tied in points. And Montreal has a tougher schedule the rest of the way than Columbus does. So this is not good if the Canadiens want to make the playoffs. They not only are at a disadvantage as far as games played, the points are now tied. Whereas if they had won last night, that would have opened up a 4-point spread over Columbus, whereas Columbus would still be at 88 and Montreal would have been at 92. And that might have been a big enough cushion for Montreal to hang on the rest of the way here. But Montreal only has 4 games left, and they are all against top NHL teams. They have Winnipeg, Tampa Bay, Toronto, and Washington left. All very, very good teams. Very difficult way to end the season for the Canadiens. Columbus, now they have Nashville tomorrow, which is not an easy game, and they have Boston again, which is not an easy game. However, they have games against Buffalo, they have games against the New York Rangers, and they finished the season with the worst team in the league, the Ottawa Senators. So Columbus has a much easier road the rest of the way, and they have a game in hand on the Canadiens. This playoff spot is now Columbus's for the taking with that win last night. That gets them into a position where they should be the team that gets the last playoff spot, and Montreal is in really, really rough shape right now. It's going to take a massive effort and wins against very, very tough competition for Montreal to get into the playoffs here. And they're going to need Columbus to lose games against teams that they should beat, like the Rangers, like Ottawa, like the Sabres. It's not impossible for Montreal to get in, but the road is just so much more difficult now with that loss last night. And it's really tipped things into Columbus's favor, given the fact that they have 3 very winnable games left on the schedule, where Montreal has no easy games left on the schedule. And the game in hand for Columbus also makes a huge difference. All they would have to do is get a point out of that extra game, and they're in by a point, and Montreal's out. So if I'm a Montreal Canadiens fan, I am very, very worried about this team making the playoffs at this point. It's not impossible, but it's much, much less likely given last night's happenings and Columbus winning that game. And that's going to be really disappointing. Montreal has held a playoff position, mostly a wild card spot, but they've held a playoff position for a large majority of this season. So if they don't get in, that is going to be very, very disappointing for them and their fans especially, because they kind of, given how they've played all season, were kind of expected to be a playoff team. And now it's a very real possibility that they may not be, and they could be the first team out. Moving on now to the Western Conference, Montreal is the first team I'm very worried about. The second team is the Minnesota Wild, because Minnesota currently sits at 79 points, and they are 4 points out of a playoff spot. Colorado holds the last spot with 83. Now, there are no games in hand issues in the Western Conference race. All 3 teams that are fighting for that last spot, Colorado, Arizona, and Minnesota, have played 77 games. They all play tonight, which means after tonight they'll be at 78 games played and have 4 remaining. Games in hand are not an issue with this. This all comes down to points. And Colorado has 83 points. Arizona has 81, and they play each other tonight in a massive game for that wild card spot tonight. And then Minnesota sits back at 79 and has to play Vegas tonight, who is a better team. So if I'm a Minnesota Wild fan, I am very worried and very disappointed that this team looks like they're probably not going to make the playoffs, because Colorado is in the driver's seat with the 2-point lead. And Arizona has a chance to pull up right next to Colorado at 83 points if they can win tonight. Minnesota, they have a tough game against Vegas, but a game that they can, win. It's not Vegas. Colorado just beat Vegas. Minnesota should be able to beat them as well if they play properly. But Minnesota hasn't. The other issue with them is they have not been playing well lately. They're 3-6-1 in their last 10 games. They've lost 2 in a row. That is not the direction you want to be heading in a tight playoff race like this. Not at all. Whereas on the other hand, Colorado has been playing much better. And they're 6-3-1 in their last 10, and they just beat Vegas to get to 83 points. So it really feels like Colorado's in the driver's seat here. Arizona is right behind them, and Minnesota feels like they're back off a little bit, and I'd be worried if I were a Minnesota fan. Now, the Wild have to be rooting extremely, extremely hard for the Arizona Coyotes tonight when they play Colorado. Because if Colorado wins tonight over Arizona, Colorado goes to 85 points. Arizona stays at 81, so that opens up a 4-point spread over Arizona. And then if Minnesota loses tonight, that would be a 6-point spread over Minnesota. With only 4 games left, that would basically knock Minnesota out of it. If Minnesota beat Vegas tonight and Colorado beat Arizona, then they would be tied with the Coyotes, but still 4 points back of Colorado. Best case scenario tonight for the Minnesota Wild. In any situation, they need to beat Vegas tonight. They need to win tonight. If they lose tonight, that's a big problem, because someone is going to win that Colorado-Arizona game, which is going to open up that gap between them and Minnesota. Best case scenario for Minnesota tonight is that Arizona wins in regulation and Minnesota wins, and it doesn't matter if it's in regulation or not. Minnesota needs 2 points tonight to get to 81. If Arizona wins tonight, they get to 83. Colorado stays at 83. And then you have Colorado and Arizona tied and Minnesota only 2 points back with 4 games remaining. That would not be they still definitely have a chance if that's the case. If Colorado wins tonight in regulation and Minnesota loses tonight, that opens up a 6-point gap. That is basically a death sentence for the Wild. Another thing that the Wild cannot have happen is that Arizona-Colorado game tonight go to overtime, because then both teams will get at least a point, and that would be a big problem for Minnesota. So they do not want to see overtime in that game. They want to see Arizona win that in regulation, and they want to beat Vegas. That would be best case scenario for them. Maybe that does happen, and then they're right back into it, only 2 points out. However, they'd still be the team out. They still have to jump 2 teams to get into this spot. They are the 3rd out of a 3-team race. That is not a good position to be in, especially given the fact that they haven't played well in their last 10 games. So if I'm a Minnesota Wild fan, I am very worried that this team is not going to make the playoffs. I'd say we'll see what happens tonight. Tonight is a huge night. Holy cow, tonight is a huge night for the entire Western Conference race. All 3 of these teams tonight means a lot. But right now, if I'm a Minnesota fan, I'm pretty worried. But tonight can change all of that. If things go well for Minnesota tonight, they win and Arizona wins, keeping Colorado at 83. Then I think I get a little more optimistic about, hey, at least we have a chance. But Wild fans are probably biting their nails on the edges of their seats right now about whether or not this team is going to get in or not. And I would say that if I had to give, who's the favorite, I would say Colorado has the best chance of getting in, Arizona 2nd, and Minnesota 3rd. And that could potentially change after tonight. We'll see what happens. But if I'm a Wild fan, I am very nervous right now. So Minnesota, I'm very, very worried about. Montreal, I'm very, very worried about. I think they could end up being left out of the playoffs, and that would be very, very disappointing for both teams and both fan bases. But that's just my opinion, given where the standings are right now and in the schedules ahead for them. We'll have to wait and see how it all actually turns out. But with that, like, comment, share, subscribe, follow on social media. All those links are in the description. If you'd like to further support the channel, the links to our Patreon and merchandise store are in the description as well. Keep spreading the word about this channel. Let's keep this thing growing. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll talk to you guys soon.